My name is Tamara Smith, and welcome to our Coffee Talk supporting our LGBT plus kids. Before we start our presentation, we'd like to show you a brief video, and then we'll start with our presentation. Thank you for your patience.
Welcome. We are glad you're joining us today. We are the Mental Health and Behavior Support Services Department of Stockton Unified School District. In times of uncertainty, there is one thing we know. Students, families, and educators are resilient, creative, and tenacious. Our students need support, and we, as parents and educators, also need support to provide support. Here, we provide brave and safe places to engage in wellness. Want to know more about us? We recommend going to our website, which can be found off the Stockton Unified School District main page. There, click on Departments and Programs and go to Mental Health Behavior Support Services tab. Today, you are attending a talk by our department. This talk is to give you some general information on a given topic. You should expect that part of the time will be informational, and part of the time will be spent engaging in either discussion or practice. In all of our talks, we ask that you provide the other members with not only a safe space, but a brave space to speak freely. This means that we ask the following of you. Be kind to each other and yourself. Be respectful of the needs of the members in this group. Be honest in your discussions and be supportive of each other. To be supportive and create a safe space for others, we need to be confidential. That means absolutely no recording of meetings or chats. If you record these meetings, you will be asked to stop immediately. What happens here stays here. Please do not share members' names or student names outside of this meeting. While we ask you all to be confidential, we cannot force you. Therefore, we caution you that what is shared here cannot be made fully confidential, and we are also mandated reporters of abuse and neglect. Finally, always feel free to reach out to us directly if you have needs that require more individual and confidential attention. While we hope to provide you with some help today, our support and time during this group is limited. If you find that you have more questions or have identified more needs, that's okay. That's even great. Let us know, and we'll be sure to follow up with you individually after this talk. One last thing, if you're attending a virtual meeting, you are muted upon entry. Don't worry, we will make sure that you're unmuted during times of discussion so that you can speak freely to us. If you have immediate questions, please share them in the chat, and please don't Zoom and drive. We ask that you follow the rules of the road and be safe. Thank you for your time, and most importantly, thank you for joining us.
All right. Hello again, everyone. Before we dive into our information, I wanted to take a second to acknowledge that October was actually LGBT History Month. And this was a big reason why Tamara and I wanted to have our original presentations in October, was because we really wanted to bring awareness to October as LGBT History Month, which a lot of people don't know about. So just a little bit about it. It started in 1994 by a teacher named Rodney Wilson, and he believed that there should be a month dedicated to the teaching of LGBT history. So what he did is he got with community leaders and teachers and chose October because it was during National Coming Out Day, which was October 11th. And then school was also still in session, so it was an opportunity for students to learn more about LGBT history. Just a little bit about National Coming Out Day. It just brings awareness to people who have come out and people who can't come out because of safety issues. And what happens is people share their stories with the world through social media and other outlets. And it really is a huge form of support for our students and young people, because they can see people coming out, overcoming challenges, and living their lives out and proud. but it also raises awareness to people within the community who are coming from unaccepting backgrounds or parts of the world where LGBTQ plus people aren't necessarily accepted. And with that, we would go ahead and introduce ourselves. So Tamara, if you'd like to start us off.
Okay, again, I'm Tamara Smith, and so I am a mental health clinician with Stockton Unified School District. I have worked in this field for 30 plus years, working with children, adults, and families from at-risk communities who have a history of trauma. I facilitated Transgender Matters, which is a actual program that the county put on. It was a professional development and informational training for 3 years in San Joaquin County. Also, I've done suicide prevention trainings for teens and young adults at the Trevor Project. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And it is in San Joaquin County as well. I've also done LGBT group facilitating for transitional aged youth groups, youth and adults for over 4 years.
And I'm Amanda Munoz. I'm also a mental health clinician with Stockton Unified. I've been working with children and youth for the past 4 years. I minored in LGBT studies at San Francisco State University, and I've worked with various LGBT groups within the college setting. I also facilitated GSAs within our middle schools and interned at the GLBT History Center in San Francisco. I've also volunteered for the respite program at the LGBT Center in Sacramento. And what you can tell from both of our experiences is that we're very passionate about the LGBTQ community, and we're really excited to share some information that we have for you today. So I wanted to just take a second to reflect on why you're here. Maybe you're here to learn more about the LGBTQ plus community. Maybe there's a student in your class or a student you're aware of that you work with who has come out to you, and you want to know how you can support them a little bit more. Maybe you're here because someone you care about is in the LGBTQ plus community. It could be a family member, a friend, or even just someone you know within the district. Regardless of why you're here though, it's important that we acknowledge that you're here because you care. So Tamara and I thought it would be really important that we share our stories with you. So just a little bit about me. I grew up in a military household. My parents never really took a stance on LGBTQ people, but I knew since I was 5 that there was something different about me, but I didn't have the vocabulary to express what it was. It wasn't until I got a little bit older that I started to understand that my friends were having crushes on people of the opposite sex while I was having crushes on people of the same sex. Again, this was never normalized or talked about. So it was like a form of rejection for me to know that maybe these people don't exist and there's something wrong with me. All through elementary, middle, and even high school, I don't remember there ever being conversations about LGBTQ plus people. Again, that felt like another form of rejection. So I was living my life in a way that I felt like I could be accepted. But I just remember being really sad, really alone. And to top it all off, we lived overseas during my high school high school years, and we would get regular television, but the commercials were actually created by the military. And these commercials would vary about, how you should keep your hair cut, or just reminders about certain deadlines and stuff. But there was this one commercial that was a don't ask, don't tell commercial. And that really struck me because I felt that because you're gay, you can lose your job. Not only in the military, I just thought in general you could lose a job, which at the time, I think there weren't any laws passed to protect LGBTQ plus people, as now that I'm thinking about it. And it wasn't until I was around 17 that I discovered like message boards and websites of people who supported the LGBTQ plus community. And then I also saw people who were out, who had careers, who were successful, who were married and had families. And it gave me hope and made me feel like, wow, people who are similar to me exist. So with that, just that little bit of support that I received from just going online was enough for me to come out to my family. And I've come out multiple times before. Now I'm 30 years old, but I've really developed a strong network of family, friends, and just community. And proud. I'm really proud of who I am today, and I feel like I'm a successful adult now.
Mhm. Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah.
I always love hearing that story.
Yeah.
So I grew up, of course, in the 60s and 70s. Not of course, but I mean, because I do look young, but I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and which was a very difficult time in our country, of course, being Black. So let alone coming out as a lesbian was something that was taboo and something that should not be done. And although I knew at 7 years old that I had an attraction to women, I had to live my life based on the expectations of my family, especially my mom, for fear of being disappointed, a disappointment to her, or an embarrassment. So I lived my life as a lie, most of it. And so I lied about who I was. I lived two lives. I was very unhappy, and it was unhealthy for me. I was very depressed for many years, trying to please other people. And I battled for years, struggling with myself, my family, my beliefs. But one day I finally just said, I either have to accept myself or I have to, pretty much die. So I took a whole new leaf on life, and I decided to come out to my family, to my friends. Of course, I did have friends that I was already out to, but these are friends who didn't know, coworkers. And that was not until I was 42 years old. And of course, I still got rejected, questioned like crazy, because I had to keep coming out and keep coming out, like Amanda says, which was pretty hurtful. But one thing I can say, it was very strengthening though. Even though it was hurtful, it strengthened me and it made me who I am today, actually. And today I'm 59, so that's over 12 years. So of course that's not a phase that I was going through. This is from 7 until now. And I'm completely proud and accepting of myself, regardless of what other people think or feel. And it's about me being true and authentic with myself. And I have many friends who, are exactly the same age as me, who have the support that they needed coming out. And that was unusual at that time, but they did. But my family, of course, because we grew up in a, my mother said when I came out is like, you're Black, you're a female and lesbian. That's 3 strikes against you. So it was not anything that was a normal situation. And so I do understand, and I have a passion for the kids that are sitting in these classrooms, because I know that they're exactly feeling how both Amanda and I felt growing up, kind of separated from the world, and not being authentic and real with yourself. So, that's why it's extremely important that we tell the schools, the homes, and other environments, and teach people how to be more welcoming of the community, because it's already hard enough as it is just coming out.
Yeah, and I think what's really great that you pointed out, Tamara, is that even though we have different stories, like our coming out stories are completely different, we have that shared emotional experience of feeling alone and that sadness and that feeling of rejection. And so, it's great that you pointed that out, because this is exactly what we're trying to avoid in our schools now, so that our students know that they are supported. And, that's why we're here giving this presentation, to kind of give you some of this information that you can use with either at home or in the classroom setting, to help your students a little bit more, and then to help them, of course, feel accepted.
Exactly.
So just wanted to quickly go over, what does LGBTQIAAP stand for? It's a really, really long list of letters, and I can't go over all the identities and orientations today, but I will have some resources for you that you can check out, so you can get some more terminology if something that you're looking for isn't on what I'm going over today. And I want to apologize. I keep having to move our picture across the screen so I could see the screen behind us. So if you're seeing this right now, I apologize, it's the Zoom feature. So let's start with L. L is lesbian. It's a woman who is primarily attracted to women. G is gay. It's a man who is primarily attracted to men. This could also be used as a broad term. So for example, I identify as lesbian, but I can also say I'm gay. B is bisexual. It's an individual attracted to people of their own and opposite gender. T is transgender. It's a person whose gender identity differs from their assigned sex at birth. And so we're going to be using the term cisgender as well. So cisgender is the opposite of transgender. It's a person whose gender identity aligns with their assigned sex at birth. So for example, I was born female. That was my assigned sex at birth, and I identify as female now. So that makes me cisgender. Transgender is a person, again, whose gender identity differs from their assigned sex as birth. For example, if someone was assigned female at birth and they identify as their gender identity is male, that would be an example of transgender. We also need to include our non-binary folks. So non-binary can mean a different definition for each person. If there's one thing that one piece of information that I can give you that you can take away today is that if someone comes out to you, make sure you get the definition from them so you understand what that means for them. Because I've met people who identified as non-binary and they don't identify as either gender. I've met people who are non-binary and they say they feel like both genders. So really just talk to either your student or your family member, or maybe even a coworker if that's the case, so that you know what that definition means for them. Jumping into queer. Now queer is an umbrella term. It's to be more inclusive of the community. The thing about it is when someone tells you they're queer, all they're telling you is that they're not straight. So it really is this broad term. Now, queer is sometimes seen as a term that is a negative term, right, for the community. But in reality, what's happened is the queer community or the LGBTQ plus community has taken this term back and used it as a form of empowerment now. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone is accepting of the word queer, so let them come out to you if they use this term. But a lot of our younger folks are starting to use this term more. Q is questioning. It's the process of exploring and discovering one's own sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, or gender expression. I'm hearing this a lot in our middle schools and our high schools. People are questioning. They don't quite have the vocabulary to what they're feeling, so they're identifying as questioning. I is intersex. It's an individual whose sexual anatomy or chromosomes do not fit within the traditional markers of female and male. And A is ally. It's typically a non-queer person who supports and advocates for the queer community. It can also be a person within the LGBTQ community who is an ally for another person within the LGBTQ community. So for example, if you're watching this from home and you don't identify as necessarily LGBTQ, but you support the community, you can consider yourselves an ally. I identify as lesbian and I consider myself an ally of the transgender community. A also stands for asexual. It's an individual who generally does not feel sexual desire or attraction to any group of people. Now, the thing is, people who identify as asexual can still have romantic relationships. I think there's some confusion with that sometimes. But again, there's a lot of subgroups to this, so it's important that you talk to the person who came out to you so you can understand what does this mean for them. And lastly, we have pansexual. I'm noticing that a lot of students are identifying this way as well. It's a person who experiences sexual, romantic, physical, and or spiritual attraction to members of all gender identities, expressions, and not just people who fit into the standard binary. So sometimes people get this confused with bisexual. Bisexual is people who are attracted to people of their own and opposite gender. So there's only two, okay? Pansexual is someone who's attracted to all gender identities. That could be someone who is a male, someone who is female, someone who is non-binary, someone who is transgender, so on and so forth. It's just a more inclusive way of, attraction. It's just being more inclusive towards attraction. So we're kind of segueing into the Trevor Project. Tamara talked a little bit about it earlier and how she was doing some trainings from them. The Trevor Project is the leading national organization providing crisis intervention and suicide prevention services to our LGBTQ young people under 25. And the great thing about this project is that they do an annual survey every year of LGBTQ plus youth. So what's great is all of the information that we've gotten, all the data and statistics is as of 2019. So, and someone pointed out in our last presentation, which I think it's important to reference to, is that these are people who had access to this survey. So it really is a smaller, I guess, group of people that we're surveying or that were surveyed. So that's important to note too, because it could be, maybe there's some LGBTQ plus youth who were maybe too afraid or didn't have access to the survey as well. But also on the flip side, it's pretty recent. So we're going to get some up-to-date information about what our youth are struggling with right now.
Okay, so some statistics a little bit here. And before I go into this, I want to preface this. You know, the odds are that there is an LGBTQ plus kiddo in most classrooms and schools today. Who do not feel safe enough to come out and be themselves due to some of the continued stigma, discrimination, and even in schools now, they're being bullied, even by their own age groups. So we do want to keep that in mind. So 68% of LGBTQ youth reported symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder in the past 2 weeks. Including more than 3 in 4 transgender and non-binary youth. And as Amanda talked about the transgender, we're going to be mentioning a lot about the transgender here in the statistics, and non-binary, who are, it shows here that they're more than likely than other groups to have these symptoms and these mental health disorders. So again, 55% of LGBTQ youth reported symptoms of major depressive disorder in the past 2 weeks, including more than 2 in 3 transgender and non-binary youth. And then again, 48% of youth, LGBT youth, reported engaging in self-harm in the past 12 months, including over 60% of transgender and non-binary youth. That's a huge statistic, a huge number, 60%. And self-harm is, you know, it could be cutting, it could be substance abuse, it could be, you know, sometimes there's a lot of people who get caught up in prostitution, those kinds of things. And it's not because they're doing it because they want to, it's because sometimes they feel like they need to in order to survive. So just keep in mind that these statistics are pretty high.
Yeah, and you know, I think that with the rise of social media and everything, we're seeing that the LGBTQ community is kind of normalizing a little bit, where it's being talked about more on social media, and our high schoolers and sometimes middle schoolers have access to like Instagram and TikTok and things like that, and people are talking about the LGBTQ community. So it doesn't sound so foreign like it did for like when we were younger, you know. But the thing is, there's a lot of support out there and people learning about like LGB specific. But when it comes to the transgender and non-binary community, it's not being talked about as much. It's not, you know, being acknowledged as much in classrooms. And I think this is why we're seeing this, you know, higher amount of, you know, depressive symptoms, you know, and stuff like that. Is because it's not being talked about as much, and they're probably, you know, the community is probably not feeling as supported when it comes to politics and when it comes to school settings, when it comes to even in work. So this is important for us to know, if, you know, as educators and staff members of Stockton Unified, so that we can kind of normalize this a little bit more in our classrooms and talk more about this community.
And that is definitely well said, because that's true. So again, the Trevor Project survey results. So we're talking now suicide and mental health. So LGBTQ youth who considered suicide, and again, we go to the cisgender, and like Amanda was saying, is that cisgender, they were born female and they identify as female. 34% cisgender youth consider suicide, but 52% transgender and non-binary. And even the cisgender could be, you know, like Amanda says, the lesbian who identifies as still female, you know, and it was born female. These are less of the people. So again, we are talking about people who have been more accepted. And 52% of transgender and non-binary people possibly have not been as accepted in the community. The age of youth who considered suicide, 48%, 13 to 17 years old. That's a high amount. Of course, we're dealing with that age group in elementary schools and then in high school as well. So, you know, that's a huge amount of those youth who are considering suicide. And then also 34% from 18 to 24 years old. And that's still a large amount. So, it's, you know, like I said, I did the transitionally aged group, youth group. And so those are transitional age groups that are considering suicide.
Yeah, and again, I can't emphasize enough that, you know, 48%, that's our age group. That's who we work with right now at school. And again, this is why it's important that we have these conversations and we learn more about this community so we can be a form of support for these students.
Okay, and then these are just some more statistics, just in general, for 55% of LGBT youth reported symptoms of major depression, again, in the last 2 weeks. 2/3 of transgender youth reported symptoms of major depressive disorder in the past 2 weeks. 15% of these youth attempted suicide in the last 12 months, and that's a pretty significant amount. 48% of LGBT youth engaged in self-harm behaviors in the past 12 months. So again, trying to avoid, trying to self-soothe, doing all those things by harming themselves. And then 46% of the LGBT youth wanted mental health services, but were unable to receive it. So it's not necessarily always that they didn't get the services, but receiving it in a very open, healthy, safe space is what usually this is about, is that they were able to receive services, but they, you know, really have to be a little bit more specific in some ways of addressing the issues. And not only saying that just because you're LGBT youth, you're going to be depressed and you're going to be those things, but sometimes it does stem from stigma and the way they're being treated by society.
Mm-hmm.
So here are some of the impacts, because we know COVID, of course, has done a lot of impact stuff for us this time. I mean, even in my own world, I've been impacted. So I know that our youth have been impacted. Decrease of positive social interaction. So, you know, you're not around friends, teachers, and staff, so you need support. And then one thing about this community, sometimes there's not a whole lot of support systems. And so this is very important to know that the interactions have decreased, so some of the symptoms have increased. Increase of negative interactions if family is not supportive, just like I said. And then isolation at home if student does not have access to supportive friends. So, you know, the community really needs to be involved, and even the kids who are not LGBTQ youth are having struggles. So we know that if our statistics that we've just seen, if they're being just as affected, you know, the community and the LGBT youth community is being even more so.
Yeah, and some of those symptoms you were talking about earlier can be rising right now, like you said, because sometimes kids don't have access to a personal cell phone or don't have access to a computer where they can chat with their friends. So I can't imagine how some of our students are feeling after, you know, they had a safe place coming to school and having their friends group or supportive staff members that they could talk to. And now they're home, you know, if maybe their parents don't know, maybe their family members are not supportive, right? And even if they did have counseling at home, you know, that's still counseling at home. And there's that fear of maybe I can't express myself for fear someone might overhear my conversation with my therapist, for example. So COVID-19 is really having an impact on our students as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of going to segue into like, how can I support my student, whether that be as an educator, as a staff member, or even just as a parent. And so there's this really great organization called PFLAG, and they had listed some ways that you can show support to, your family member or to your student. And the first one is leading with love, showing love. And you can do this by simply just saying, I love you, and giving a hug, or I support you, or I care about you. Sometimes as adults, we might not always have the right thing to say. And maybe something like this can just really, I don't know what to say right now, but I love you a lot and I care about you, and I want to learn more about this. Are ways that you can kind of help situations that might feel, oh man, I don't have the words right now. So the next one is listening with intention and utilizing active listening when talking with your student. So when we talk about active listening, what we're really looking at is making eye contact, not interrupting, being mindful of your facial expressions and your reactions as you're having conversations with your student or your child, and just really like letting them know that you're listening to them and you're hearing them out. I hear you. I see what you're saying. Phrases like that can really create an impact on your child or your student. And the next one is showing support in subtle ways. And I think this is probably one of the biggest ways that you can show that you support your student or your child. A lot of times, like both Tamara and I had said, that there wasn't those conversations in schools about the LGBTQ plus community. And something that you can try in your classroom is maybe acknowledging a celebrity, or maybe something happened in politics, something positive happened. Or maybe there's a TV show that features an LGBTQ plus character. These are subtle ways to kind of bring up these subjects, either in the classroom, individually with your child, or individually as a staff member of SUSD. I can remember something that my dad did was he was part of an agency, and they had a panel for Pride Month, which is June. And it was people within the agency who were either in the LGBTQ plus community or had a family member in the LGBTQ plus community. And he had just sent me a text one day just saying that, hey, I'm joining this panel. I want to learn a little bit more. Maybe we can chat about it after. And that was a subtle way of showing support, because he didn't make it a big deal or anything. He just kind of dropped a line one day and said, hey, I'm checking this thing out, I want to learn a little bit more. And even now to this day, he'll send me photos through text of like mugs with rainbows on them and be like, oh, I thought of you today. And so the little things like that can really make a huge difference. If you're in a classroom setting, you can get something as simple as like a little pride flag to keep in your pen cup. And because what our kids are doing is they're really hyper aware of who is a safe person to talk to. So they're looking around, they're kind of paying attention to you, seeing how, you react or how you talk about the community, or if you show support in your classroom. So those are really great things that you can do. And you can also address any bullying right away. For example, if someone uses a term that is really offensive to the community, you could correct that right away. Or you can just educate too. So these are all really important things to do with, our LGBTQ plus students. Lastly, we have understanding terminology. Again, we went with, we provide a little bit of information on some of the terminology that we use. But again, continuing to do your research, asking questions, and then, going back to the person and making sure you understand how they identify and what that means for them, are all ways that you can really help and show support to our students and to your child at home. And I just want to acknowledge too that you're not going to get it right away. It's hard learning something new. It takes time. And sometimes, like, I even do this where I misgender someone. So for example, if someone says, hey, I want to start using he, him pronouns or they, them pronouns, it takes time to learn that. And if you do mess up, it's simple. You could just be like, hey, acknowledge your mistake. Hey, I'm sorry. I meant to use your correct pronouns. Going forward, I'll make sure to do a little bit better. I'm sorry. And that's it. That shows that you understood that you made a mistake. You addressed it, you apologized, and you moved along. So that can make a world of difference too.
And I want to chime in real quick about some of the subtle ways again, is that, our body language says a whole lot. It says just as much as our words do. And so, as I'm listening to you, I'm kind of going up and down with my head because I'm listening and I'm, appreciating what you're saying. And I'm, kind of listening and acknowledging you. And sometimes it's more hurtful when we do things with our bodies and show things that's very hurtful. And so that's, it's going to turn us differently. And so, as we've said already, is that, you already know how society thinks. We know how people think about it. So when they're thinking about that and they show it, they don't have to say it. They just show it in what they're doing, how they can reject you. Because I have an example of when I was going to take care of my nephews and my brother. I was going to go over his house. I was going to take my partner with me. We were just going to go over and kind of hang out and take care of the kids. And he said, well, you know what? I really don't want that in my house. So that in my house is saying that, that is me. And so, those are types of things that are very, even though he said it directly, but it really was very hurtful. And it was in a way that was saying that instead of saying, well, I really don't want you in the house right now doing whatever, he said that. So that's subtleties that's saying that that particular person or these people in general are not really worthwhile in our household or in our environment or around around my kids or whatever. So, really be mindful, and I am too, as to how I, show myself in my body and in the language and what, how I respond with my facial expressions. And like Amanda said, it's not going to be overnight, but it's just being mindful of it.
And that's the thing, is that we're trying to build awareness now, right? Because if you're aware of it, you can make a change in behavior and how your body language is. I can't tell you how many times that I saw an eye roll as a young person, and how that felt just so much rejection. Oh, here she goes again. That's how I interpreted it. And again, like our kids are hyper aware of what's happening and are paying attention. And they're trying to determine, are you a safe person? Can I talk to you? So you hit it right on the nail. Did I say that right? Hit it right on the nail. Whatever. but that's exactly it, is that, our kids are paying attention, and it's important to check yourself, when you're having these conversations. Mm-hmm. So I did want to acknowledge some of the resources that we have here in Stockton, and then some online resources as well. Stockton is really lucky to have the San Joaquin Pride Center. I think right now, because of COVID, they're not able to do, like walk-in appointments. I think you have to call ahead of time to schedule something. But I believe they're doing a lot of virtual things, like virtual groups. I know they have an LGBTQ plus youth group. They have a parents group, I believe, and then specific groups to I think they have like a transgender support group as well. And then you can also find the similar groups at like the Gender Health Center in Sacramento, the LGBT Center, and the Central Valley Pride Center in Modesto. And what's also really great about these centers is that all of them have sliding scale therapy. And what's cool about it, especially I know for a fact the Gender Health Center has training on working with LGBTQ plus clients. So you can really find a therapist who kind of specializes in working with LGBTQ plus people. The next one we have, I mentioned it earlier, is PFLAG. It stands for Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. Really great network. Usually they have created our chapters. And I remember it felt a lot like a support group where we would meet weekly and kind of just talk about things that are in the news right now, maybe something that we're struggling with. And we would do fundraisers and lots of great events. And it really felt like a network of people that I can, lean on and get support from. Unfortunately, Stockton doesn't have one. I think the closest one is in Sacramento right now. But it would be great if someone's listening and wants to start one up. I think there would be a lot of interest. The next one is the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. This is really big for our educators. They have a lot of neat features on there, like they have a educator network. You just type in your email and you can get inclusive curriculum. You can get key dates so that you can bring them up in your classroom, like coming out day. You can also get more resources, and they even have a book club, I believe, where you can get age appropriate books for all age groups, whether they have a LGBTQ plus author or characters in the story are LGBTQ. We already went over the Trevor Project. And then I also put GLAD on here. It's mostly a media organization that makes sure that the media is telling fair and accurate stories of LGBTQ plus people. It kind of talks a lot about how to be inclusive. But the reason why I added this resource in here is because they do this thing every year called the GLAD Awards, where they recognize people who support the LGBTQ plus community. And if you're looking for, some information or maybe some celebrities to bring up and talk about, this would be your place to go. The last one I have is the National Center for Transgender Equality. It's a nonprofit for social equality and organization, founded in 2003. Has a lot of great information on there. There's some really good articles on understanding transgender folks and understanding non-binary people. They also have a Know Your Rights page for each state where you can get what are your rights in, for example, California on employment, healthcare, and housing. So you can, if you're thinking about maybe moving out of state too, you can kind of learn a little bit more about that state and what legislation they have passed. And then the last one, the last bit of information for the National Center for Transgender Equality is the self-help guide. It has information on, like, let's say you want to, in California, you can get your ID card and have it say non-binary. It has a self-help guide on how to do that. So really great resources. If you want, I can email these out to you. My email is apmunoz@stocktonusd.net. And that's the end of our presentation.
All right, we thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.